You didn't just buy a ruin, Nora, my father said. You proved you are the worst investment this family ever made. Richard Bennett sliced his turkey with small, exact movements. As calmly as if he were discussing the weather. I said nothing. 14 months later, that same man would stand outside the gate of my property and beg me to sign a contract before midnight. Not because he missed his daughter, because if I refused, the investment fund run by the son he loved most might collapse before the market opened the next morning. But that Thanksgiving evening, no one at the table believed I possessed anything worth begging for. My parents' house sat in a gated development outside Spokane. All stone columns, polished floors, and windows, tall enough to frame the falling snow like expensive artwork. Ethan occupied the head of one conversation, describing several new investors who had joined his fund. Olivia kept lifting her left hand so the chandelier would catch her engagement ring while she discussed florists, venues, and a guest list that had already passed 200 names. My mother, Diane, spoke about a hospital fundraiser as if she had personally invented generosity. I arrived 20 minutes late, wearing a clean sweater over the same black pants I had worn through a 12-hour shift. A tire had blown on Interstate 90, and I had changed it myself on the shoulder, while trucks sprayed gray slush across my coat. No one asked whether I was all right. My hands smelled of rubber and frozen road salt. My mother only glanced at the clock. The conversation turned to real estate after Richard mentioned a warehouse project. That was when I told them I had closed on a property in Cedar Valley. 54 acres, an abandoned mountain lodge, a caretaker cabin, 3 collapsing outbuildings, and enough neglected timber to keep a demolition crew busy for months. I had paid $72,000 in cash, $48,000 from years of overtime, and $24,000 my grandmother had left me. There was no mortgage. I owned the land outright, along with every broken window and rotting beam standing on it. Olivia laughed first. Are you opening a haunted house? Ethan leaned back and asked whether I understood why no bank would finance the purchase. The main lodge had been marked as an unsafe structure. The roof had partially collapsed. Restoration costs could exceed the value of the buildings. He's right, I said. The structures may be worthless. That answer briefly confused them. I explained that a high-voltage line crossed less than 2 miles from the eastern boundary. An old utility easement appeared in the title records. The county had begun reviewing an upgrade to the access road. Several neighboring parcels had recently been purchased by different limited liability companies. Although the companies shared registration addresses, I did not claim I knew what it meant. I said only that the land interested me enough to accept the risk. Richard set down his knife. You read a few public records during your night shift and decided you understand development? Earlier that day, a snowstorm had closed 2 major routes through eastern Washington. 34 trucks carrying time-sensitive freight had been trapped between delivery deadlines and impassable roads. I had rebuilt their schedules, found alternate corridors, negotiated new warehouse windows, and kept our company from paying penalties that would have reached 6 figures. At work, exhausted drivers trusted my judgment in the dark. At my family's table, I was still the woman who answered telephones at night. I understand that it is my money, I said. And my decision. My father's expression hardened. If you want to live like a stranger, then this family will treat you like one. No one objected. Not Ethan, not Olivia, not my mother. I folded my napkin, placed it beside my untouched plate, and left without arguing. 3 days later, A thick envelope arrived at the dispatch office. It came from Richard's attorney. The letter removed me from the family trust, erased me from my parents' wills, and instructed me not to enter their home without written permission. I thought it was proof that I had lost my family. It took me much longer to understand that it was the first legal document confirming I was finally free. Families like mine did not create one large wound. They created a museum of smaller ones, each displayed as if cruelty were discipline. The first exhibit was a painting. I was 15 when I entered a statewide youth art competition with a landscape of the Columbia River at dusk. I worked on it for 3 weeks, painting after homework and waking before school to adjust the colors. When I won first place, I carried the canvas home with the blue ribbon pinned to one corner. Richard looked at it for less than 5 seconds. "Art does not pay the electric bill," he said. 2 days later, the painting was leaning against a stack of tires in the garage. That same month, Ethan brought home an average grade on an economics essay. Richard had it framed because the title included the phrase, "free markets." I learned that effort mattered only when it produced something my father respected. The second exhibit was graduation. My class crossed the stage on a June afternoon. I had saved 4 seats in the bleachers and kept looking toward them while the principal read names. They stayed empty. Ethan had been accepted into a summer internship, and my parents decided that taking him to dinner was more important than watching me receive my diploma. Aunt June sent a card with $20 inside, but she did not come either. I walked home in my cap and gown because I had given my bus money to a classmate who needed it more. By the time I reached our street, the tassel was sticking to my face with sweat. No one took a photograph. The most expensive exhibit came years later. I was working as a logistics clerk and had been selected for a final interview for warehouse manager. It meant better pay, benefits, and daylight hours. Olivia knew the date because my mother had mentioned it during a family call. 40 minutes before the interview, Olivia phoned me from a shopping center parking lot. She said another car had struck hers. The police were there, and they required a family member to come. Her voice sounded frightened enough that I left immediately. When I arrived, there was no ambulance and no injury. The damage was a scraped bumper. The police had already gone. Olivia stood beside her car, checking messages. "Thank God," she said. "The tow truck is taking forever. Can you wait here and let me borrow your car? I have a PR meeting." I stared at her. "You knew about my interview. You are an internal candidate," she said, as though explaining something obvious. "They can reschedule." They did not. When I told Diane what had happened, she sighed. "Olivia should have handled it differently," she said. "But you chose to leave. A manager cannot abandon responsibilities every time the phone rings." In one sentence, Olivia's selfishness became evidence of my incompetence. That was when I stopped giving my family advance notice of anything that mattered. I was not brave enough to cut them off. I still attended holidays, answered my mother's calls, and hoped each invitation might be different. But I began closing small doors. I stopped mentioning interviews. I studied digital mapping and supply chain coordination during quiet hours at work. I took extra shifts and moved money into an account no one knew about between 2 and 5 in the morning, while drivers checked fuel receipts and dispatch radios fell silent. I read county plans, tax records, zoning maps, foreclosure notices, and listings for rural properties no one else seemed to want. I did not yet understand boundaries. I only understood concealment. Still, secrecy gave me room to build something they could not interrupt. The first time I drove into Cedar Valley, the property looked worse than the photographs. Branches swallowed most of the access road. The lodge roof had collapsed over the main hall. Broken windows stared across the clearing like empty eyes. Mold and wet wood thickened the air. A red county notice on the door warned that the structure was unsafe to enter. I stood quietly among the weeds and rotting beams, listening to wind move through the ruined rooms for the first time. I asked myself whether I had bought the place because I saw hidden value or because it looked the way I had learned to see myself. The engineer arrived on a Monday morning carrying a clipboard, a flashlight, and the expression of a man who had seen too many bad decisions. I had paid for the smallest inspection package he offered, hoping for reassurance. Instead, he walked through the lodge, tapped walls, photographed cracks, and gave me a list that grew longer by the minute. The main building could not legally be occupied. Asbestos was present in sections of old insulation and floor tile. Part of the foundation needed reinforcement. Several beams had been weakened by water. Restoring the lodge, he said, might cost more than demolishing it. The caretaker cabin was different. It was small, ugly, and neglected, but salvageable. Before I could sleep there safely, I needed a licensed electrician to repair the wiring, a septic inspection, new plumbing, and a heating system that would not fill the room with carbon monoxide. For the first time, I understood that buying land outright did not mean I had escaped bills. There was no mortgage, but property taxes still arrived. The insurance company charged a painful premium because of the damaged structures. Generator fuel disappeared faster than I expected. Building materials went onto a credit card. The access road needed gravel before winter, every inspection, permit, and professional opinion carried another fee. I had not misread the opportunity. I had underestimated the cost of surviving long enough to reach it. So I kept my night job. I worked 12-hour shifts, drove to Cedar Valley after sunrise, and slept a few hours in the cabin when it was safe or in my truck when it was not. During the day, I cleared brush, removed debris, sealed windows, and handled only the work I could do without endangering myself. Electricians handled the wiring. A contractor stabilized the damaged section of the cabin. Licensed workers dealt with asbestos. I hated paying them because every invoice felt like proof that I was losing control. But I was beginning to learn that competence included knowing when not to pretend. Then an invitation arrived for Diane Bennett's 60th birthday. It came through the mail, addressed in my mother's handwriting. I told myself Richard had written the letter cutting me off. Perhaps Diane had remained silent because she was afraid of him. Perhaps the invitation was her quiet way of asking me to come back. Hope can make an old wound feel like an open door. The party was held at a club outside Spokane. I wore the best dress I owned and brought my mother a gardening book she had mentioned months earlier. Olivia waited until the gifts were being opened. "I have something for Nora," she announced. She handed me a large box wrapped in silver paper. Inside was what she called a renovation survival kit, a cheap protective suit, rubber gloves, a toilet brush, and a plastic badge printed with the words Nora, cleanup crew. Ethan laughed immediately. Several relatives gave uncertain little chuckles, the kind people use when they want to remain on the safe side of power. Most guests said nothing. An older woman near the cake table frowned and said, "That is enough, Olivia." Richard smiled. "It is a joke," he said. "Nora used to understand those." I looked at Diane. She did not ask Olivia to apologize. She leaned toward me and whispered, "Please do not ruin my birthday by making this into something larger." I folded the protective suit, placed it back in the box, and walked out. Diane followed me into the parking lot. For one foolish second, I thought she had come to say she was sorry. "I know Olivia went a little too far," she said. "But leaving like that makes people think something is wrong with our family." I turned toward her. "Are you worried that I was humiliated, or that people saw me being humiliated?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her silence answered clearly. Inside my truck, I sent one message to the family group. From now on, I will not attend events where my presence is used as entertainment. All communication with me must be in writing. I left the group and blocked Olivia's number. Halfway back to Cedar Valley, my phone lit up with a message from Aunt June. "I am sorry I did not stand up for you. I recorded everything tonight. I will keep the video in case they ever claim it did not happen. Winter did not care whether I was brave, foolish, or deserving." By December, Cedar Valley had disappeared beneath snow. The access road narrowed into 2 frozen tracks, and every trip to work became a calculation involving fuel, weather, and the possibility of sliding into a ditch. The cabin's heating system worked when it wanted to. Some nights it pushed out enough warmth to keep the pipes safe. Other nights it coughed, clicked, and surrendered before midnight. After property taxes, insurance, generator fuel, repairs, and permit fees, little remained from each paycheck. I was not starving, but I was living carefully. Oatmeal, eggs, canned soup, pasta, and whatever vegetables were cheapest. I learned how long a loaf of bread could last if every slice had a purpose. The worst night came in January. The temperature dropped far below zero while I was working. When I returned after sunrise, the cabin door resisted because ice had formed along the threshold. Inside, I heard water moving where water should not move. A pipe had split behind the bathroom wall. Water spread across the floor, soaking insulation and running toward the utility closet. The heating system had shut down after moisture reached part of the controls. I found the main valve and stopped the flow, but the damaged pipe was hidden behind wiring I did not trust. My hands shook from cold and exhaustion. Every stubborn instinct told me to open the wall and fix it myself. For once, I listened to the quieter voice that said I could make everything worse. I sat on the front step in my work coat, staring at steam rising from my breath. I had bought the land, survived the first repairs, and kept my job, still sitting above a frozen floor. I finally admitted that I had gone beyond what one person could safely carry. A truck approached through the snow. Hank Miller lived about a mile down the road. He had noticed the generator producing dark exhaust and came to investigate. He carried a thermos, a toolbox, and no expression of pity. He inspected the damage, shut off power to the affected section, and opened the wall only after confirming the wiring was safe. He installed a temporary section of pipe and helped me restart the heater. Then he handed me coffee. "Knowing how to do things yourself is useful," he said. "Knowing which things you should not do yourself is better." He refused payment, but he accepted my promise to help when he needed something. Rosa Alvarez began helping more quietly. She owned the gas station and grocery store near the highway. She had noticed that I usually bought noodles, eggs, and exactly enough gasoline to reach work and return. One evening, she placed a loaf of bread, cheese, apples, soup, and a fuel voucher beside the register. Then she opened a notebook and wrote each item down. "I will repay every dollar," I said. "I do not doubt that," Rosa replied. No one had trusted my word before seeing a result. I paid something whenever I could, even if it was only $10. I also reorganized Rosa's delivery schedule, reduced unnecessary supplier trips, and built an inventory sheet that helped her stop overordering food that expired. With Hank, the exchange was different. I found a discontinued part for his old table saw through a freight contact. I arranged a medical appointment he had postponed because the scheduling system frustrated him. When his truck failed, I hauled lumber from town in mine. They were not rescuing me. We were making each other's lives more manageable. During a warmer week, Hank helped me clear one room near the lodge's storage area. Behind a warped cabinet, I found a water-damaged landscape painting. Most of the surface had darkened, but a corner still showed mountains reflected in a blue lake. I cleaned that section carefully and began restoring the color. Hank watched. "Where did you learn that?" "I used to think I was good," I said. Then someone explained that it had no value. Hank studied the painting. No buyer does not mean no value. Days later, I found an old guest book from the late 1970s. Entry after entry mentioned the same detail. Even during drought, the lodge water stayed clear enough to see stones at the bottom of the pond. For the first time, I wondered why an abandoned resort had once possessed so much water. The guest book did not make me rich. It made me curious. The following Saturday, I returned to the lodge storage room with a flashlight and a dust mask. Behind a collapsed shelving unit, I found a sealed metal blueprint tube. The cap resisted until I used a wrench. Inside were brittle documents wrapped in stained canvas. The oldest was a geological survey dated 1924. Beneath it lay diagrams of 2 wells, handwritten notes about underground piping, several certificate numbers, and a pump test report from 1978. The report recorded flow rates, water levels, and recovery times I did not fully understand. I did not celebrate. Old paper was not money. A map did not prove ownership, and a number written in fading ink did not guarantee that any legal rights still existed. Still, the documents deserved protection. Curiosity had taught me enough to know that silence could be an asset. I photographed every page, created encrypted copies, and placed the originals in a bank-safe deposit box. I told no one in my family. I posted nothing online. During quiet hours at the dispatch office, I searched county records, scanned title documents, and followed references through databases that seemed designed to discourage ordinary people from understanding them. That search led me to Rachel Kim. Rachel was a Spokane attorney who worked with rural landowners, irrigation districts, and water right transfers. She listened without interrupting while I described the lodge, the wells, and the certificate numbers. Then she removed every fantasy from the room. A geological map does not establish a legal right to withdraw water, she said. The certificate may have expired, been abandoned, divided, transferred, or limited. Even if it remains valid, changing the use from a resort to an industrial project would require review. We need the title history, beneficial use records, the certificate file, and every recorded agreement connected to those wells. Her initial fee went on to my credit card. I negotiated the remaining work in stages, with each new expense approved before she incurred it. Rachel seemed to respect that I asked about cost before pretending I could afford certainty. For 3 weeks, she found mostly complications. Then she called me during my lunch break. The certificate had a priority date from 1978. More importantly, the former lodge owner had signed a nominal agreement allowing the Cedar Valley Fire District to draw water from one well during wildfire emergencies and training exercises. The payment was almost symbolic, but the agreement had been renewed repeatedly. That use mattered. It did not guarantee unlimited rights, and it did not eliminate the need for regulatory approval, But it meant the water right had not simply disappeared during the years the lodge stood empty. Rachel hired a hydrogeologist to review the records and test the wells. His report was less dramatic than the fantasy I had first imagined, and far more valuable because it was real. I did not own the aquifer beneath the valley. I did, however, control 2 high-capacity wells with documented recovery rates and a potentially transferable right to withdraw a significant amount of water. The parcel also sat near an existing power corridor and a practical fiber route. The land was not a buried gold mine. It was a difficult collection of infrastructure advantages that could become valuable to the right buyer. While tracing old title references, I found another document, a property evaluation prepared 18 years earlier for a development partnership. The signature at the bottom belonged to Richard Bennett. My father had inspected the same land. His conclusion appeared in one sentence. No commercial future, restoration costs exceed total property value. I had looked at the ruined lodge, calculated the building costs, and stopped. The utility easement, well records, and surrounding access had been listed in the appendix, but he had treated them as irrelevant. For years, I had assumed Richard saw more than I did. Now I understood that expertise could still be blinded by contempt. 2 days later, Rachel forwarded a letter from Cedar Basin Holdings. The company offered $14 million for the entire property, demanded confidentiality, prohibited me from contacting other buyers for 120 days, and proposed a rapid closing after due diligence. Rachel read the offer twice. "They are not paying $14 million for a ruined lodge," she said. "Our first job is finding out what they are trying not to tell you." Cedar Basin Holdings existed mostly on paper. Rachel traced its mailing address to a law firm that represented North Star Infrastructure, a company quietly assembling land for a regional data center campus. Several neighboring parcels had been purchased through different limited liability companies, but the signatures, registered agents, and filing dates formed a pattern too consistent to be accidental. North Star had been buying around me. My property sat in the middle of what their maps called the preferred development zone. The wells were only one piece of the problem. The land also carried the shortest recorded easement to a nearby high-voltage corridor, along with a practical route for fiber and a service road. An alternate site existed, but reaching it would require new transmission work, a longer fiber run, and additional road construction. Rachel estimated the delay could exceed a year and add tens of millions of dollars. Worse for North Star, the utility had reserved electrical capacity for a limited period. If the project slipped too far, that reservation could expire for the first time. I understood why $14 million had been presented as an opening gesture instead of a final number. I did not call the buyer and deliver a speech. Rachel sent a written response. "Our client will not grant exclusive due diligence rights until the buyer discloses the full scope of its interest in the land, water rights, and recorded easements." The negotiations became less dramatic than a shouting match and more exhausting than one. $14 million covered the land as North Star first described it. The number rose to $30 million after the power easement was confirmed. It reached $48 million after the hydrogeologist completed the well report. When North Star's alternate location encountered a capacity problem, the discussion moved to $65 million. Each increase came from evidence. Not courage alone. I had found the documents. But Rachel, engineers, title specialists, and water experts turned them into facts a board could price. Rachel also insisted that North Star pay for its own investigations without receiving control of my schedule. I continued working nights, sleeping in the cabin, and paying Rosa's notebook $10 at a time. The numbers discussed in conference rooms had not yet become money I could spend. Any report could fail. A regulator could reject the transfer. North Star could walk away. Remembering that kept me patient when Daniel's team tried to create urgency by mentioning board meetings, construction seasons, and expiring agreements with utilities. Then the people of Cedar Valley learned what was coming. At a county meeting, residents asked whether the cooling system would lower nearby wells. Farmers worried about drought years. Others questioned who would pay when construction trucks damaged the road. North Star spoke about tax revenue and temporary construction jobs. But no one could explain how many permanent jobs the project would actually create. Rosa listened from the back of the room. Afterward, she asked me, "Are you trying to sell your land, or are you selling the right of everyone who stays here to live in peace?" Her question followed me home. A transaction could be legal and still transfer its hidden costs to people who had never signed it. I told Rachel I wanted new conditions in the deal. North Star would have to prioritize recycled water, accept a defined limit on groundwater withdrawal, publish monitoring data, create a fund for residential wells, improve the access road, support the fire district, and finance a local training program. Daniel Cole, North Star's senior counsel, met us by video. He did not threaten me. He simply explained that every condition carried a price. "These requirements reduce the amount available to the seller," he said. "I understand. You could take more money and let the permitting agencies impose whatever protections they consider necessary. I lived here when this land meant nothing to your company," I said. "I know exactly who will live with the consequences after I leave." Daniel studied me for several seconds before closing his folder. North Star agreed to evaluate a package with a total potential value of $82 million, subject to final terms, regulatory review, and due diligence. That evening, my phone displayed a message from Diane. She had sent an old photograph of us together when I was 6. I was sitting on her lap, smiling without caution. Beneath it, she wrote, "I miss you. We should not let money divide this family." I had never told my mother the amount under discussion. The first article appeared 3 days after Diane's message. A regional business journal reported that North Star Infrastructure was negotiating for the final parcel needed for a major data center campus in Cedar Valley. It did not name the purchase price, but it described the land as strategically important because of water access, power easements, and fiber connectivity. The story spread quickly through Spokane's business circles, where people who had never noticed me remembered my name. By noon, my family had become affectionate. Diane sent photographs from my childhood, the recipe for the chicken soup I had loved when I was 10, and an invitation to dinner. Her messages used words she had avoided for years: sweetheart, home, family, miss you. Richard's email arrived that evening. He wrote that he had always recognized my instincts for property. His criticism, he explained, had been intended to make me cautious. The family had never opposed my success. They had simply worried that I was taking risks without guidance. There was no apology for Thanksgiving, the legal letter, or Olivia's gift. The next paragraph revealed the purpose. Richard proposed placing the property and any sale proceeds under the Bennett family office. He offered to advise the negotiation, arrange a short-term loan for Ethan, and present a united family to the press. Love had arrived first, revision followed. Then came the invoice. Aunt June called before I responded. She sent me the video from Diane's birthday. The footage showed Olivia holding up the toilet brush, Ethan laughing, Richard calling it harmless, and Diane asking me not to ruin her evening. "I am not sending this so you can punish them," June said. "I am sending it because they are trying to make you doubt your own memory," I thanked her. "But trust will take time," I said. "I know," she answered. "It should." Ethan called later from a private number. He sounded tired rather than confident. There was no polished investor voice, no Richard speaking in the background. His fund had suffered 2 major losses. Instead of reducing risk, Ethan had borrowed more and tried to recover quickly. He had purchased leveraged call options tied to a company expected to benefit from North Star's expansion. Investors were already demanding withdrawals. If North Star announced another delay, the options could fall further and his broker might issue a margin call. "I am not asking you for money," he said. "I only need you to sign on the current schedule, maybe a little earlier, if possible." I asked whether his investors knew how exposed the fund had become. Silence. "Not all of them," he admitted. For one painful moment, I heard the frightened boy beneath the expensive education and tailored suits. "A mile." Richard had taught Ethan that love followed victory. Every achievement raised the standard, and every mistake threatened exile. My brother had spent his life trying to remain the child our father could admire. That explained him. It did not excuse him. "You need independent counsel," I said. "And you need to tell your investors the truth." "Nora, please, you do not understand what happens if this collapses." "I understand exactly what you are asking." His breathing sharpened. "You are not going to let this entire family fall apart just to prove you were right, are you?" There it was, even in confession. Ethan believed my interests were available for family use, my due diligence, my environmental conditions, and my legal protection were things I should sacrifice so he could postpone consequences. "You do not need me to sign early to save you," I said. "You need to stop digging the hole. I could lose everything." "I am sorry you are afraid, but your fear cannot become my obligation." I did not change the review schedule after the call. I sat in the cabin with Diane's soup recipe open on my phone and June's video paused on my laptop. One screen showed the mother I had wanted. The other showed the mother I had. Rachel called before midnight. A second buyer had entered the process. The infrastructure fund was prepared to offer $90 million. For several seconds, I could not speak. Then Rachel explained the conditions: maximum water withdrawal, minimal environmental restrictions, no residential well protection fund, and broad rights to transfer the project later. North Star's package was smaller. The new offer was richer, by morning. I would have to decide whether the best price was also the right deal. The $90 million offer arrived in a polished document that made its risks look almost elegant. The infrastructure fund wanted nearly the maximum water withdrawal regulators might allow. It proposed fewer monitoring obligations, no firm commitment to recycled water, broad authority to transfer the project to another operator, and a closing schedule designed to finish before the county could organize meaningful public resistance. Rachel read every page before giving me her opinion. "If the permits are approved, this structure could be legal," she said. "Legal does not mean harmless. The valley would carry most of the long-term risk, and the buyer would retain most of the flexibility." $8 million separated the two offers. I had once stretched a loaf of bread across 6 meals. I remembered standing in Rosa's store, calculating whether I could afford apples and gasoline in the same week. I remembered the frozen pipe, the wet floor, and the moment I sat outside believing my father had been right about me. $8 million could erase every remaining fear twice over. For an hour, I tried to make the difference feel abstract. I wrote the figures on paper, subtracted taxes, and imagined what $8 million could buy. But every calculation returned me to the same truth. Money could protect me from scarcity, yet it could not protect me from becoming careless about other people once I had power. It could also become another version of Richard's voice, telling me that the largest number was always the smartest answer. I took both offers to Hank's cabin. He listened while I explained groundwater limits, recycled water systems, monitoring requirements, and the difference between $90 million and 82. He did not tell me which buyer to choose. Instead, he asked, "After people stop talking about the number, what do you want to remember that you sold?" The question stayed between us. I was not selling only damaged buildings and 54 acres. I was transferring control over wells that had supported firefighters, nearby homes, and the lodge long before I arrived. I might leave Cedar Valley after the sale, but Rosa, Hank, and everyone who had treated me like a neighbor would remain. The larger offer treated them as costs someone else would absorb. The next morning, I instructed Rachel to continue with North Star. Their total package remained $82 million because they agreed to build a water reuse system, cap groundwater withdrawals, publish monitoring data, improve the access road, fund local workforce training, protect the fire district's existing rights, and establish financial protection for residential wells. The payment structure was less cinematic than a single wire transfer and more secure because of it. North Star would pay a non-refundable $5 million option fee. $57 million would be released at closing. The remaining $20 million would stay in escrow until the water right conversion and easement approvals were completed. Daniel Cole asked whether I understood that choosing North Star meant knowingly accepting $8 million less. Yes, I said. Richard had spent my childhood teaching us that the highest price proved who had won. He saw every negotiation as a contest with one intelligent person and one fool. I was beginning to understand that a bargain could make both sides richer while leaving invisible people to pay the bill. I did not want Cedar Valley to become the final place where I repeated my father's definition of success. The purchase agreement was signed 2 days later, but the transaction had not closed. I remained the legal owner while North Star completed its final inspections, regulatory filings, and title work. Because survey equipment and confidential records were now stored on the property, North Star hired temporary security. The guards monitored the 2 wells, the testing equipment, the document storage area, and the sections of the lodge marked for asbestos. Contractors repaired the old gate motor and installed cameras near the entrance. Nothing about the property looked luxurious. The lodge still sagged beneath winter damage. My truck still had rust along the wheel wells. Rosa's notebook still contained a small unpaid balance. But for the first time, the gate worked. That evening, I received a message from Richard. "Ethan and I are on our way. Do not sign anything until we talk." I looked through the cabin window at the repaired gate, standing closed beneath the mountain shadows. Then I typed 4 words. "You do not have an appointment." The 4 of them arrived just before sunset. Richard drove the lead car. Diane sat beside him, her posture rigid behind the windshield. Ethan and Olivia followed in a second vehicle. They stopped at the repaired gate, where 2 security guards stood beside signs warning that the property was under active survey and access was restricted. Richard stepped out first. "Open this gate," he ordered. One guard explained that no visitors could enter without authorization. testing equipment, asbestos zones, and confidential records made the restriction mandatory. Richard looked past him and saw me walking down the gravel road. "I am her father," he said. "I do not need an appointment." I stopped on the other side of the gate. "That belief is exactly why you are standing outside it." His face tightened. He said Rachel was manipulating me, that I had no experience handling this kind of money, and that the family office could protect the proceeds. He insisted the purchase agreement should be reviewed by people who understood wealth. Then he spoke about Ethan. If his fund collapses, investors lose money, employees lose jobs, and this family's name is destroyed. You have a duty to prevent that. I looked at my brother. "I did not invest other people's money," I said. "I did not use leverage to hide losses. I did not tell Ethan to buy those options, and I did not delay this transaction to hurt him. I completed due diligence, negotiated environmental protections, and defended an asset I owned." Richard opened his mouth, but I continued. "I did not push Ethan over the edge. I am refusing to lie down so he can walk across my back one more time." Diane moved closer to the gate. "No family is perfect," she said. "But we are still your family. Surely we can stop blaming one another and begin again." I asked her to name one specific thing they had done wrong. She looked at Richard, then at Olivia. "We have all made mistakes." It was the language of accountability, without the burden of admitting anything. She could not name the birthday party, the legal letter, the missed graduation, or the years of silence. Ethan had remained near the second car. Now he stepped forward. "I am scared," he said quietly. The words carried no performance. For a moment, he was simply my brother, frightened by the consequences waiting for him. "I believe you," I said, "but I cannot turn your fear into my obligation." I took an envelope from my coat pocket and passed it through the gate. Inside was the contact information for an attorney who handled fund restructuring, investor disclosure, and whistleblower protections. "This is someone who can help you tell the truth and reduce the harm," I said. There was no check inside. Olivia laughed sharply. "So this is who you are now? You found some old maps, got lucky, and decided you are better than everyone." I did not argue about whether luck had played a part. "Finding the maps may have been luck," I said. "Keeping the property through winter, verifying the records, building a professional team, negotiating responsibly, and refusing to sell it cheaply were not." She looked away first. "I could have called reporters. I could have recorded Richard shouting and posted the video beside June's footage. I could have made the moment public and permanent. I did none of those things." "You need to leave," I said. "Blood explains who you are. It does not decide what you are allowed to do to me." Richard stared through the gate as if he still expected obedience to arrive late. When it did not, he returned to his car. Diane hesitated, but she followed him. Ethan kept the envelope. Olivia slammed her door hard enough to echo through the valley. I watched both cars disappear down the road. Behind me, the lodge sagged beneath the evening snow. Nothing looked like victory. The only visible change was the gate. Closed now because I had finally learned that access required permission. There was no triumph in me. I leaned against the cold metal gate and cried. Not because I wanted them to return, but because I had finally stopped waiting for them to become a different family. 3 weeks later, the transaction officially closed. 1 year after the closing, Ethan's hedge fund was wound down under supervision. He cooperated with attorneys and regulators. Although several investors still sued, Richard sold one commercial property to cover guarantees he had signed. My parents moved into a smaller house, not poverty. simply a life without the scale they had mistaken for safety. Olivia continued telling people that I had chosen money over family. Diane sent letters. She wrote that she missed me, that time was passing, that families should forgive. She never named the birthday party, the legal letter, or the years she had watched me be diminished. I did not celebrate their difficulties. I also did not rescue them from consequences they had created. Some people caught in Ethan's collapse had not caused it. Through an independent nonprofit, I funded legal advice for employees who were owed wages and support for those who provided evidence of misconduct. I had no control over their cases and asked for none. I would not save the man who started the fire, but I would not ignore innocent people trapped inside it. Rosa refused every dramatic gift I suggested. So I bought the commercial property through an LLC, repaired the heating system and cold storage, and gave her a long-term lease for $1 a year. She kept running the store because retirement had never been her dream. When the repairs finished, she handed me the old credit notebook. The last page contained one line. Paid in full, long before the money came. Hank refused cash more forcefully than Rosa had. Instead, I created a medical fund, a maintenance trust for his cabin, and a community woodworking shop. He agreed to teach teenagers 2 days each week, provided no one called him inspiring in front of him. Money changed what I could choose. It did not immediately change what my body expected. I still checked grocery prices before placing anything in my cart. I stored too many packages of noodles. Large bedrooms made sleep difficult. Unknown numbers tightened my chest. An emergency bag remained behind the seat of my truck. I began therapy because survival habits do not disappear when a bank balance changes. One evening, I opened a can of beans and lifted the spoon toward my mouth without heating them. I stopped, looked at the stove, and turned on the burner. It was a small thing. But I was learning that I had not only earned the right to survive, I had the right to be cared for, even by myself. Before North Star removed the lodge, I painted Cedar Valley at dusk. I hung the finished landscape in my study. There was no ribbon beneath it, no sales price, and no review. Only my name. I also restored my old truck. Rachel once asked why I had not replaced it with something expensive. It was never ashamed of me, I said. My new home was modest, warm, and close enough to Cedar Valley that I could see the mountains after storms. It had a small dining table, a painting studio, and a window facing the pines. Hank and Rosa each had a spare key, both called before visiting. That detail mattered more than the keys. Being granted access did not mean someone was entitled to use it whenever they wished. I once believed victory would come when my father admitted he had been wrong. Real victory came when I no longer needed him to say it. Money gave me choices, boundaries gave me peace. The people who cared for me when I had nothing taught me that family is not made of those who believe they have the right to enter. Family is made of those who still knock, even when they are holding a key. So what do you think? Is refusing to rescue someone from consequences an act of revenge, or the first time you allow them to take responsibility? Can you forgive someone without giving them access to your life again? Share your thoughts in the comments. If Nora's story reminds you of a boundary you fought hard to build, share your experience only if it feels safe. Subscribe for more family dramas about healing, responsibility, and people learning to rewrite their own worth.